By the end of this video, you will have an understanding of the key mindset shifts, transitions that I created that allow me to lose my excess weight, which, as many of you know, was born out of me creating a healthy relationship with food, myself, my lifestyle, my activity. And if you're anything like I was a few years ago, you might be tempted to skip past the mindset stuff and just be like, Rach, just show us what you do with your food, with your lifestyle, with your activity. If that is you, I completely understand. So I have an analogy for you, which hopefully will get you even more on board with what it is that we're talking about today. Let's say that our healthy relationship with food, that relationship with food that we really, really want to have, is a plant. Let's say it's a plant just like this one I'm going to use to illustrate my point. The seeds planted in this pot are our mindset. We plant the seeds, we water it, we nurture it, and things are happening below the surface that we can't yet see. And then after a little bit of time, a little bit of nurturing, it starts to sprout. And then before you know it, you've got a full, living, breathing, beautiful plant. Now, what I was doing for years, which some of you may also relate to, is I was just looking at someone else's plant. Let's say you had a healthy relationship with food, a healthy lifestyle, and I wanted that. Basically what I was doing was I was walking over to them and picking their plant, just cutting it off and taking their plant away. I was just looking at all the surface level behavioral stuff that they were doing and copying it, because that made good sense to me. The trouble is, we've just walked off with a plant that's not rooted in anything. And unfortunately, within a few days, that plant is going to start to wither. We have to plant our own seeds. And I know it comes across a little less glamorous. It is a bit slower. But then what we have at the end is something then that is ours to keep. If you're new here, welcome. Hi, my name's Rachael. I'm a nutritional therapist and a trained disordered eating recovery coach. I help women move from binge eating, emotional eating, and overeating to a normal, healthy relationship with food so they can find their natural, healthy weight, feel confident, make peace with food, and just start living their life and thriving. If that sounds like you and you're interested in finding out more about how I work with clients, perhaps potentially become a client, then you're very welcome to book a free introductory call with me and we can discuss it further there. I moved from a scarcity and deprivation mindset around food to one of permission and, for lack of a better term, abundance. And this was absolutely crucial in my weight loss because it removed so much of the food obsession, the obsessive thoughts that I had about particular foods or food in general, and my binge eating. When I was doing these things, which I'll share in a moment, to create this scarcity mindset around food, it created such an urgency to eat. I would often say that I'm going on a diet and I'm restricting my food because I binge eat. But actually it turns out that I was binge eating and having what I call last supper eating, when I was really off the rails, as it were, and trying to cram in as much food as possible, because tomorrow, I was saying, the restriction comes in. I would pendulum swing from being quite controlled to, well, today's ruined, and this making the most of it and binge eating was fueled out that scarcity mindset of tomorrow it's no more, not the other way around. And this simple thing of removing the dieting, huge thing, but simple, removing saying I'm going to restrict tomorrow, now it took a lot of the weight out of how I wanted to eat today. When I had foods that I considered bad or that would make me gain weight or were unclean, foods that were off limits to me, even though I considered them to be bad, because they were off limits, they had this huge novelty aspect to them. They had this heightened allure and they would sing to me. If I knew that they were in the house, I would find it difficult to concentrate on anything else. Food obsession fueled by a scarcity deprivation mindset. I'm going to stop there with the scarcity mindset because I've made a video on that, which I'll point you to, but it moves me nicely on to the next point, which is the labeling of myself. The conclusions that I drew about myself and the beliefs that I had about myself and food moved from being very unhelpful and very limiting to being helpful. So let's take the example of food singing to me in the cupboard, being obsessed with these foods. I was labeling myself as a food addict and someone that had food obsession and someone that liked food too much. Inaccurate conclusions to draw and really unhelpful labeling. The trouble with unhelpful labeling or limiting beliefs is they're like a self-fulfilling prophecy. The moment a client says to me something like, I can't have Nutella in the house because I'll eat the whole jar in one go, I know that that's happening, not because they can't actually control themselves around Nutella, but because they are telling themselves that that's what they do. A huge mindset change that completely transformed my relationship with food and helped me lose weight was understanding that the things that I told myself had weight to them, and my beliefs weren't there because of what I did. I was doing what I was doing because of the beliefs that I had, and I took ownership of that and I took control of that, and I actively started working on the things that I was telling myself and the things that I believed about myself to ultimately bring new behavior. When clients learn this skill of being able to reframe and change their belief system about themselves and about food, you can just imagine the natural transformation that follows after that. It's such a powerful skill to have, and anyone can learn how to do it. Moving on. I had to get out of, for lack of a better term, out of denial. I was in so much denial about dieting. It didn't seem to matter how many diets that I cycled through, how many attempts to restrict my food that I cycled through. I still believed that dieting was the answer. And I forgive myself for this because the other answer, another path to go on to, wasn't clear to me for 10 years. I didn't know that there was a second option other than dieting for gaining a balanced way of eating and having a naturally healthy weight. Well, hang on a second. Why don't I have a naturally healthy, balanced relationship with food? Why is that? What's standing in my way of that? How can I obtain that for myself? I started asking much better questions, started taking much better actions, started being more helpful towards myself, and actually started to make the progress that I'd always wanted to see. Again, with the labeling, I was labeling myself as someone that was weak, had no willpower, had no control. And that wasn't true. It's just that diets made me very hungry and food obsessed. I lost my excess weight in part because I really internalized moving away from shoulds, rules, you have to do this, Rachel, to I'm choosing to do this. And it's one thing to say this to ourselves, I'm choosing to do this, I'm choosing to do this. And it's another thing to actually really internalize that and really feel like, yeah, I am choosing to do this. I'm not sure if that made sense, but I think some of you will understand what I mean. And how that shift managed to happen to make me genuinely want to choose to eat a nutritious meal, eat a balanced meal, to say, actually, now I'm going to choose not to have cake right before my dinner, rather than you should have a balanced meal, you should eat a nutritious meal, you really shouldn't eat cake. The key, the biggest difference there for me was one of permission. I can do anything I want. If I want to sit and eat cake all day, if I want to sit and eat chocolate all day, then I can. Genuinely meaning that I can do that if I want to, allowed me to see for the first time what I wanted to do when my rules weren't there. Remove the power that these foods, these more processed foods, had on me for so long. I have some clients that purposefully and intentionally put themselves into what I call a novelty phase, where they just go, yeah, I'm going to eat all the foods that I want to eat without guilt, with full permission. Because what so much of this is novelty and deprivation and scarcity and rule-bound thinking. Very few of us actually, when we're given the genuine option for ourselves of how to eat, want to eat in an unbalanced way. I firmly believe it. I see it all the time. When clients go through this novelty phase, and I also went through it, if you're not familiar with my story, typically I see one of two things happen. The first is the novelty phase runs its course. Then after a couple of days or a week, they're like, yeah, I'm just not that fussed by these foods anymore. Or the novelty is still there to some degree, but their motivation shifts to, yeah, I could eat these foods and continue to eat a lot of these foods, but actually I would like to nourish my body today. That's calling me today. When I combined, and when my clients combine, genuine permission to eat whatever we like, when we like, with a genuine desire to nourish our body in a balanced way, that is an incredibly powerful position to then be in. The mental freedom that gives alone about food is huge. My mindset shifted from rule-bound thinking to a trust in myself and my body. I had to follow so many rules about dieting and what I could and couldn't eat because I had zero trust in myself, my appetite, or my body. So I felt like those rules were necessary. Gaining a healthy relationship with food and the healthy natural weight that I have now was a result of, in part, learning how to trust myself to make helpful decisions for myself, learning how to trust my body that actually it knows what it's doing and it wants to be on the same team as me, and learning how to trust my appetite. When I finally started working with my body and I was feeding it when it was hungry, and we'll talk more about this in the video that I'm going to do on the way that I eat, but just to touch on it briefly. And I started working with my body in that way and building up my sense of confidence and competence to make helpful decisions for myself in the moment from a place of genuine self-care. Not because I had rules, but because I genuinely wanted to care for myself. That's when my body started working with me. I felt like I had been in this battle with my body unnecessarily for a decade. And when I started working with it, everything became so much easier. And my body started working with me to actually start to promote health and a healthy weight. I will talk more about that in the video that I bring out on the physiological changes that I went through in order to facilitate my weight loss. And I touched on this in my last video, but just to reiterate, because it's so important, you might wonder, what on earth has me gaining self-love and self-care got to do with my weight loss? And it had everything to do with my weight loss. Self-love was a big reason why I stopped using food emotionally. It was a big reason how I could start to take helpful action for myself. It was the difference between having a food rule and eating a balanced meal because I genuinely wanted to do that for myself. It was the difference between being patient and impatient. It was the difference between me being able to reflect on and learn about my relationship with food in a judgment-free way rather than condemning myself over how I was eating and staying stuck. Self-love was the difference for me to look at all the limiting beliefs and negative self-talk that I had about myself that I thought motivated me, which didn't, and think, hang on a second, I don't want to talk that way about myself. I don't want to believe these things about myself. And of course, we've already spoken about changing how I talk to myself and what I believed of myself is a big instigator in then creating a new behavior around food and way of living. For so long, I thought, I'm going to get a handle on my food, I'm going to get a handle on my weight, and then I'm allowed to like myself, then I'm allowed to love myself, then I'm allowed to validate myself. This was such a huge mistake, and this was to my own detriment. Building on my self-esteem and self-love is what facilitated such a huge transformation in my relationship with food. As we touched on in my last video, I had to shift my mindset from being very impatient to being very patient, both in time and with myself. Everything that I wanted to achieve and now have, it couldn't come overnight. All the work that I had to do on my mindset and the experimentation that I needed to do to find out what works for me, all of the mistakes that I needed to make to help me grow and learn, that all required patience. And I'm so glad that I finally reached the point that I decided to be patient, because I wouldn't be sitting here now talking to you about this if I had kept trying to force myself to change so fast. But one thing that I always put to clients when we talk about, taking a bigger picture view, because I get it, but I think what so many of us do is we think we'll stay the same and then overnight we're going to change. Don't forget that throughout that whole period, things are getting better all the time. Things are improving all of the time. And because it's not overly difficult or painful, because we're taking it slow at our own pace, it's really a rewarding process. I see clients being really fulfilled by the process, even if they're not right at their end goal yet. I needed space to be able to make mistakes, and I needed space to be able to experiment. I wasn't looking to be on a diet. I was looking to heal my relationship with food and to find a way of eating and being with food that really worked for me. And in that comes experimentation. In that comes being okay with doing some things that weren't particularly helpful in order to find that out. We can demand so much from ourselves to do things absolutely perfectly from the word go. That's so unnecessary and so unreasonable, and it actually doesn't help us get anywhere. And it's difficult because those of us that develop disordered eating, often there is some correlation there with perfectionist traits. So it can be particularly difficult for some of us to not demand ourselves to know everything from the word go and to do everything perfectly from the word go. But the truth is, we learn through experimentation, through trial and error, and that's okay and it's necessary. It's not a bad thing, it's not a wrong thing. Everything that I did whilst I was healing my relationship with food to get to where I am now started as an experiment, no more and no less. And that brings me on to another mindset shift that allowed me to be where I am today, and that is reflecting on how I was eating, how I was doing in a very genuine way rather than judging myself. I thought I had to judge myself and condemn myself and talk so harshly to myself because that would be motivating and that would allow me to change. And I was so wrong. What allowed me to change was reflecting and asking myself genuine questions from, God, you're so hungry today. Why are you so greedy? Why do you always think about food? What's wrong with you? To, that's interesting. I feel hungrier today. Is there any reason for that? Am I coming up to my period? Am I stressed? Did I not eat much yesterday? Is it just a fluke? Have I been exercising more? You have no idea the understanding that I gained of my relationship with food because I became reflective rather than judgmental. Better questions give better answers, which allows us to take better action. That's my personal philosophy. A big mindset shift for me losing my excess weight was that food started to just mean food. I started to see food as that, something nice. It's relatively pleasurable, it nourishes my body, it fuels me. Sometimes it's about socializing. That's what food is. Food is food. Before, food had other meanings to me. Many meanings that food can take on, sometimes without us even realizing. Food for me was friend before. It was control. It was linked with my self-esteem. It was comfort as well. It was relief and release. And actually, it was punishment. Those were mine. I see many of them with clients. I had a client recently who turned to me and said, well, yeah, you know how you just eat when you're sad? And she said it so matter-of-factly as though it was common knowledge and everyone did it. And I pulled her up on it and I said, you eat when you're sad? And she was like, oh, doesn't everyone do that? Food had the meaning to her that it was a pick-me-up and a comfort when she felt sad. The thing with all of these other meanings to food that we can develop is that it can lead us to eat food or use food in unbalanced ways. And it can lead us into emotional eating, it can lead us into overeating, it can lead us into undereating, and it can lead us into binge eating. Imagine when food just means food to you. Imagine that. Can you just see how so many of your unhelpful behaviors around food just start to drop off as a natural byproduct? This was such an important mindset shift that I went through. If at this point of the video you're thinking this all sounds really good, I'd like to make some of these changes, I'd like to get onto this path, then I'll invite you to book a call with me. It's completely free, no obligation. I can get to know you, I can get to know your struggle with food, I can get to know your struggle with weight. And even if I don't take you on as a client, it gives us 20 minutes where I can help you start to see where you might be getting stuck and to help you build a plan of action that can start getting you to move forward. I'm here to help. And if you're interested, the information's in the description. And the last thing that I want to bring up today, I could go on and on about mindset. So maybe I'll make follow-up videos on this. I used to think about food about 90% of the time, very disordered about food. And now I only really think about food when I'm hungry. And if I'm totally honest, food is not that interesting to me, particularly if I'm not hungry. And I still find it remarkable how I went from complete food obsession, barely being able to think about anything else, to not being that fussed by food at all, really, particularly if I'm not hungry. And I didn't get lucky with that transformation, by the way. A lot of that's because of stuff we've already spoken about. A lot of that still has yet to come later in the series as to why that was. But one part of that, one small part of why that was, is I started to care more about other things. I never gave myself permission to really care about other things, about friendships and socializing and work and hobbies and all of these other things that make a life full always came in way below my weight and food. It was almost like I wouldn't allow myself to be happy and to be fulfilled while I struggled with food and my weight. That's how it felt. If we've got a certain amount of care that we can have about things, right, a certain amount of mental space, if we start to care about other things and focus on other things, as a natural default, we focus on food and often weight less. I worked with this lady who had really bad body image one week. Her body hadn't changed, from one week to the next when I saw her, but her body image had worsened significantly one week to the next. And as we digged a little bit deeper, the only difference really between one week to the next when I asked her was that this week she hadn't really been out to do anything fun. I prescribed her fun for that week, to go out every day and do something fun. She came back the following week and her body image had drastically improved again. And how much she was using food emotionally to cope in unbalanced ways, again, had gone right back down. I don't think that we can underestimate this at all. It can be very tempting to shrink how much we think about food and weight. I get it. But in my experience, that's so much harder to do, to try and ignore something, as it is to just add in other things that make us happy, bring us joy, give us fulfillment, and give ourselves permission to do that. We're allowed to be happy while we're healing our bodies and healing our relationship with food. In fact, it really helps for the process. I think this video is probably long enough now, so I will leave it there for you guys. But if you want follow-up videos, more information on mindset, then just let me know. Give this video a thumbs up or let me know in the comments. Until next time, take care of yourselves and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.